This is week 2 of a message series that I've called The Mission of the Church. Last weekend we began by looking at the story of Migrant and Refugee Sunday. And part of the journey that we went on last weekend was the recognition, as Pope Francis was telling us, that we are called to move towards an ever wider we, of having a much greater appreciation and experience of the various cultures and peoples of our world, of being able to stop and appreciate the incredible gifts and wonders that different nationalities have brought to our country and given us as a sense of who we are and how we've become the country we are today. But it's also a reminder that so much of our world today is more concerned about its own nationalistic situation, of people who no longer have freedoms because they are taken into a different kind of model of what it means to govern and what it means to lead people. And so we've got this constant challenge that asks us, how do we actually accept and how do we live in a world where on the one hand we have, I suppose, a consumeristic nationalism, and on the other a very individualistic attitude to what's going on around me. It's not easy, and Pope Francis, in his 2 encyclicals, Laudate Si and Fratelli Tutti, has been speaking powerfully about the need to be aware of our world as a common heritage, a common home, and people in our midst as being our brothers and sisters in the most wide sense. Nobody is excluded. And we've listened over the previous weeks to James in his letter, where he was reminding us of what the new vision of the church has to be. Not a vision of people looking after themselves, but a very real sense of a people who are working together for the kingdom of God. And so this series, this message series, Mission of the Church, is really inviting us to go beyond what is me and what I want and what I'm comfortable with, to ask, how do I walk in the feet of others in their shoes so that I can begin to appreciate the grandeur of God and the glory of the kingdom, which means a different mindset. And so last week we listened as the gospel was reminding us that we are called to be people who are looking for the needs of others, rather than saying you don't belong to our team, you don't belong to this group, but to recognise that everyone has something to contribute. This weekend there are quite a number of things besides the fact we're having the blessing of our pets at the end of Mass. There is also the sense that today is the beginning of the plenary council. And so for the last 4 years we've been journeying towards this moment when around Australia there would be a representative group who would be looking at what the Spirit is asking of us as the church at this time, what He's asking of us to be in order to appreciate the grandeur of God, but also the gifts of people. And how do we live as the church into the future? It's also Mission Sunday. Well, at least October is the month of missions, and so we've chosen this first Sunday to look at that question. The theme of this year is we cannot but speak about what we have seen and heard. A passage from the Acts of the Apostles where the disciples are saying to those who are listening, we have to tell you this message. We have to tell you what God has done through Jesus Christ, through Him rising from the dead. This is no longer a world where everything is just the same. It is now different. And because of that difference, there has to be a different response. And just as Jesus or the apostles were saying that to the people in that early church, the wisdom, the Spirit of God is saying that to us right now. It is different. Something has to change, because unless we change, then we go into, I suppose, non-existence. We disappear. The gospel message can't simply be left to the wisdom of the world. And that's where the gospel starts today. The gospel starts with a question that had been answered by Moses years before. But they came and they asked Jesus, is it okay to divorce your wife? The question that was a question that was quite easy, and it was, we could be flippant about it, but the rules had changed so incredibly that if your wife didn't cook a good meal, you could kick her out. I say nothing. But it becomes so simplistic. So what does Jesus do? Jesus goes back to the book of Genesis. He doesn't go to chapter 1 of the book of Genesis, which saw the creation of humans as being the final part of the story of God's creation. But he goes to chapter 2, where there's another version of the story of creation, where man is created at the beginning and everything else is given to man so that man may share in the glory of God. And as the story goes, we're told that at the time there was an awareness that man needed a companion, that man couldn't do things by himself. And there was the creation of a companion who would walk with and share the story of life. And so there would be a partnership that would build the kingdom of God. Not the wisdom of the world. Jesus doesn't try to answer them according to what people think. But he reminded them of the grandeur and the glory of God. He reminded them that God wanted something very different from what they were asking the question about. Because when we get caught up in the wisdom of the world, when we just focus on what's happening for me and what I need, then we lose sight of the story of God's love for us. That we are created in the image and likeness of God, and no one is a possession of anyone else. But together we share a common earth, and our responsibility is to all people. Today, as we celebrate this Mission Sunday, the focus of World Mission Day is mothers and babies, especially in Thailand, where so many women are trafficked and abused, and what happens when they're suddenly no longer of value. They get thrown out, cast out with nothing, and so the Sisters of the Good Shepherd have created a home for these women so that they have an opportunity to find a place of rest, to find a place of safety, and to be given the expertise to be able to earn for themselves some kind of livelihood. Now, just a reminder, sometimes people ask the question, what's the difference between Caritas and Catholic missions? Aren't they the same thing? Caritas is an aid agency that works with anyone and everyone, wherever. Catholic Missions works in a specifically focused Catholic identity and works simply in those areas where there is an institution such as the Mother and Babies Home or other institutions that have a totally Catholic focus, and they don't go to the wider community. Now, that's not saying they don't care about the wider community, because the people who come in can be anyone, but the focus is a Catholic story. So that's the difference. An aid agency works in the wider variety of places. A Catholic missions works in a specific and focused area. So just in case you ever wondered what the difference was and why we have two, that's the story. So the Mission Sunday is about how do we help and support people who are in need. A few weeks ago, James told us in the letter that if we have good works without faith, faith without good works, it's empty. And so the two need to go together. And so we're encouraging you today to think about how you might be able to support Catholic missions this year and the work that they're doing. A reminder that they are able to support and encourage people in places where there is great need. So coming back to this mission of the church, we've been called to be a welcoming community, a people who recognise the qualities and values and gifts of every single person around us. We're all different and we bring a different thing to every situation. And because of those differences, we have a chance to raise up a whole range of different and wonderful things around us. Today we're looking more at the sense of what does that mean when it hits the ground? What does it mean when I now have to do something about living that faith? And supporting Catholic missions is one aspect of that journey. It's a reminder to us that we don't do things in isolation, but that together we make a difference. So I'd like to hope that just as there are people who'll be gathering all over Australia today to pray for and remember the story of the plenary, we also have the opportunity to be concrete in what we do in this situation of caring for those through Catholic missions. So as I said at the beginning, there is a whole range of attitudes and actions and parts of our story today, and that's, I suppose, if we're really honest, that's the story of every day, because each one of us comes and we bring with us our own story, our own needs and our own journey, and we place them together into the presence of God. It's not just one thing, it's all of these things. So my prayer is that today we might recognise our common journey and together make a difference.